The widow never cried when her husband's coffin disappeared beneath the dry earth. Instead, she searched the crowd until her eyes found a lone cowboy standing beneath an old oak tree, his hat pulled low to hide a face carved by regret. The townspeople believed he had come to celebrate the death of the man who had hated him for 20 years. They were wrong. Hidden inside the widow's pocket was a sealed letter written with a dying hand. On its front were 6 words that would destroy every lie the town had believed. Give this only to Ethan Carter. Before the next sunrise, one promise, one secret and one impossible love would change 3 lonely lives forever. The church bell echoed across Silver Creek as another gust of wind swept dust through the lonely cemetery. Dark clouds drifted over the endless prairie, turning the afternoon sky the color of faded steel. Every rancher in town stood silently around the freshly dug grave, hats pressed against their chests while the preacher finished his final prayer. William Dawson had been one of the wealthiest ranch owners in the county. Strong, proud, fearless. Now he was nothing more than a polished pine coffin slowly disappearing into the ground. His widow, Clara Dawson, stood beside the grave wearing a simple black dress. The wind tugged loose strands of her chestnut hair across her pale face, but she never brushed them away. Her blue eyes remained fixed on the coffin as if she were waiting for it to open one last time. No tears came. That surprised everyone. Some whispered she was stronger than they expected. Others quietly wondered if there had been anything left to cry for. Only Clara knew the truth. She had spent years crying in silence. There were no tears left. Beside her stood 9-year-old Lucy, clutching her mother's trembling hand. The little girl buried her face against Clara's arm as the first shovel of dirt struck the wooden lid with a hollow thud. The sound seemed to echo forever. One by one, the townspeople stepped forward to offer condolences before drifting toward their wagons. Sheriff Cole Mercer removed his hat and rested a weathered hand on Clara's shoulder. "If you need anything," he said softly, "the town will help." Clara managed a faint nod. "Thank you, Sheriff." As he turned away, her eyes wandered beyond the crowd. That was when she saw him. Far beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the cemetery stood a tall cowboy dressed in a faded brown coat. His hat shaded most of his face, but even from a distance she recognized him. Ethan Carter. He hadn't moved once during the entire funeral. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't stepped closer. He simply stood alone, hands folded behind his back, staring at William's grave. Several ranchers noticed him. One scoffed. "I've got some nerve showing his face." Another muttered, "After what happened between them, I'd have stayed far away." They hated each other. 20 years. Never spoke again. The whispers drifted across the wind like dry leaves. Ethan heard every one of them. He ignored them all. Because none of them knew the truth. Not even Clara. When the cemetery finally emptied, Ethan tipped his hat toward the grave. "So long, Will," he whispered. Then he turned toward his horse. "Mr. Carter." The quiet voice stopped him. He looked back. Clara stood alone several yards away. Lucy remained near the grave, placing tiny white wildflowers on the fresh mound of dirt. For a long moment neither adult spoke. The silence between them carried 2 decades of unanswered questions. Finally Clara stepped closer. "I've never spoken to you before." Ethan nodded once. "I know. My husband told me never to." "I know that too." She hesitated before reaching into the pocket of her dress. Her fingers tightened around a sealed envelope. "My husband asked me to give you this." Ethan stared at it. The handwriting across the front froze him in place. For Ethan Carter. William's handwriting. His own name. For several seconds he couldn't breathe. "He wrote this." Clara nodded. "The night before he died." "I don't understand." "Neither do I." She held out the envelope. Ethan slowly accepted it, almost afraid it would disappear if he touched it. The paper felt strangely heavy. "What did he say?" Ethan asked. "He only told me one thing." "What?" She swallowed hard. "He said, find Ethan, even if he refuses to see you." Ethan looked at her as though she had spoken another language. Will said that. Those were his last clear words. He looked down at the envelope again. 20 years. 20 years of silence. 20 years of believing William hated him. Why now? Why after death? "I should go," Clara whispered. "Our ranch." Her voice cracked for the first time. "I don't know how we're going to keep it." Ethan looked up. What happened? The bank? She forced a sad smile. William never told anyone how much debt we were in. Ethan frowned. I didn't know. No one did. She turned toward Lucy. I only wanted to deliver the letter. Without another word she walked away. Ethan remained frozen beneath the oak tree. His fingers slowly broke the seal. Inside rested a single folded sheet. He unfolded it carefully. The first line stole every breath from his lungs. Brother. William had called him brother. The same word they had used as teenagers when they rode across these plains together. His vision blurred before he could read another sentence. He closed the letter. Not yet. He wasn't ready. The ride back to Carter Ranch took nearly an hour. The prairie stretched endlessly beneath the fading evening sun. Golden grass rippled beneath the wind like waves across an ocean. Normally Ethan loved the silence. Today it felt unbearable. Every memory he had buried came rushing back. 2 young cowboys racing horses across the hills. Laughing beside campfires. Planning to build neighboring ranches. Calling each other brothers. Then, one terrible night. One accusation. One shattered friendship. William had believed Ethan betrayed him. Ethan never defended himself. Some wounds were too deep for words. As the ranch house appeared in the distance, Ethan noticed smoke rising from the chimney. Old Ben, his ranch foreman, stepped onto the porch. You look like you've seen a ghost. Ethan climbed down from his horse. Maybe I did. Ben frowned. You went to Dawson's funeral? Ethan nodded. Ben sighed. Thought you might. Without another word Ethan walked inside. He removed his hat and placed the unopened letter on the kitchen table. He stared at it for nearly an hour. Outside, daylight slowly disappeared. The house became quiet except for the crackling fireplace. Finally, he unfolded the letter. Brother. If you're reading this, then I've already run out of time. Ethan's hands began shaking. For 20 years I believed the biggest lie of my life. His breathing slowed. You never betrayed me. The words struck harder than a bullet. He read them again. And again. The man who lied to me confessed before he died last winter. I wanted to ride to your ranch that very day, but pride is a cruel disease. Every sunrise I waited for tomorrow. Then the doctor told me I wouldn't have many tomorrows left. A tear landed on the paper. Ethan quickly wiped it away. I'm asking something I don't deserve. Please don't let Clara and Lucy lose everything because of my mistakes. The ranch is drowning in debt. They'll never ask you for help. That's why I'm asking instead. If there's even one piece of the brother I once knew still living inside your heart, save them. Not for me. For the innocent people who paid the price for my pride. The final line was barely readable. I hope heaven lets us ride together again someday. Your brother, William. Ethan lowered the letter slowly. The room became silent except for the fire. For the first time in 20 years, the anger he had carried like a second shadow disappeared. Only grief remained. Outside, thunder rolled across the distant prairie. Ethan walked onto the porch and looked toward the faint lights of the Dawson Ranch glowing miles away in the darkness. He whispered into the cold night, I forgave you a long time ago, Will. Then his eyes drifted toward the lonely horizon where Clara and little Lucy were facing a future they could not survive alone. Without realizing it, Ethan had already made the first decision that would change all of their lives forever. The storm arrived just before dawn. Heavy rain pounded the roof of Ethan Carter's ranch house while flashes of lightning lit the empty prairie. He hadn't slept. William's letter remained on the kitchen table beside a cold cup of coffee that had long since lost its warmth. Every sentence echoed through his mind. You never betrayed me. For 20 years those 4 words had never been spoken. For 20 years Ethan had accepted being hated by the only man he had ever called brother. He could still remember the day everything fell apart. 20 years earlier, Silver Creek had looked very different. The town was smaller, louder, and filled with young men chasing dreams across the frontier. Ethan Carter and William Dawson had been inseparable. If one rode into town, the other wasn't far behind. They worked together, laughed together, even planned to buy neighboring ranches and raise their future children side by side. The townspeople used to joke that they weren't friends, they were brothers born to different families. Everything changed after a single cattle shipment disappeared. Nearly 200 head of cattle vanished during a night drive. Someone had secretly sold them across the state line. A ranch hand named Frank Holden blamed Ethan. He claimed he'd seen Ethan meeting strangers near the river. William believed him. He never asked Ethan for the truth. His anger spoke before his heart ever had the chance. "You sold us out." Those words had shattered everything. Ethan could have defended himself. He could have revealed the truth. But doing so would have exposed William's younger brother, Daniel, who had secretly gambled away thousands of dollars and begged Ethan to keep quiet. Ethan had chosen to protect Daniel's reputation instead. Daniel died from pneumonia only a year later. The truth died with him. William never learned what had really happened. Until Frank confessed on his own deathbed. The memory faded as Ethan saddled his horse. Old Ben stepped out of the barn. "You're leaving in this weather?" Ethan tightened the saddle strap. "I need to see someone." Ben smiled knowingly. "Dawson Ranch?" Ethan looked toward the rain-covered horizon. "They're alone." Ben folded his arms. "You know half the town still thinks William hated you. They can think whatever they want." "And Clara?" "I don't know what she thinks." Ben chuckled softly. "Sometimes helping people matters more than explaining yourself." Ethan mounted his horse. "I hope you're right." The Dawson Ranch looked worse than Ethan remembered. Broken fences leaned sideways. The barn roof sagged under years of neglect. Several horses stood in muddy pens that clearly hadn't been repaired in months. William had hidden his financial troubles too well. Ethan climbed off his horse and walked toward the porch. Before he could knock, the door opened. Clara froze. She clearly hadn't expected him. "Ethan." He removed his hat. "I read the letter." She quietly stepped aside. "Come in." The house felt strangely empty. Most of the furniture had already been sold. Only a worn table for chairs and an old rocking chair remained. Lucy sat beside the fireplace reading a weathered storybook. When she noticed Ethan, her eyes lit up. "You're the cowboy from the funeral." Ethan smiled for the first time in days. "I guess I am." The little girl walked closer without fear. "Mama said your horse is the fastest in the county." Clara looked embarrassed. "I may have mentioned that." Lucy grinned. "Does he have a name?" "Storm." "Can I pet him?" Ethan looked toward Clara. "If your mother says yes." Clara nodded gently. For a minute. Lucy ran outside before either adult could say another word. Silence returned. Clara folded her hands together. "So, you read it?" "I did." She searched his face. "What did he write?" Ethan hesitated. "He apologized." Tears instantly filled Clara's eyes. "I never thought I'd hear those words." "He knew the truth." "What truth?" Ethan slowly explained everything. Frank's lie. Daniel's secret. The sacrifice he'd made to protect William's family. Every painful detail. When he finished, Clara covered her mouth. "My God. He never knew." "No." She slowly sat down. "For years he blamed himself." Ethan looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "The last few months." She stared toward the window where Lucy laughed beside Storm. "William changed. He stopped talking about hate. He started talking about regret. He said he'd wasted too much of his life carrying anger." Ethan remained silent. "He wanted to come see you. Why didn't he?" Clara gave a heartbreaking smile. "He was ashamed." A loud knock interrupted them. 3 men entered without waiting. All wore expensive coats. The tallest introduced himself. "Morning. I'm Thomas Briggs. The bank sent us." Clara's face turned pale. "I asked for another month. You were denied. We're here to inventory the property." Lucy walked back inside carrying a handful of wildflowers. "Mama?" Clara quickly forced a smile. "It's all right, sweetheart." Briggs unfolded several papers. "The ranch will officially be repossessed in 10 days unless the debt is paid." Lucy looked confused. "Are we moving?" Nobody answered. Briggs noticed Ethan. "You must be Carter." Ethan nodded. "I've heard of you." Briggs smirked. "Stay out of this." Ethan calmly stepped forward. "How much?" Briggs raised an eyebrow. "You planning to buy another man's problems?" "How much?" The banker read the amount. It was enormous, nearly enough to bankrupt most ranchers. Clara immediately shook her head. "No, Ethan. You don't owe us anything." He looked at her. "I know." Briggs laughed. "Then we're finished here." As the 3 men rode away, Silence settled over the ranch once again. Clara wiped away tears she didn't want anyone to see. I'll find work. I'll sell what's left. We'll survive somehow. Ethan looked around the nearly empty house. Then toward Lucy, who was quietly placing flowers inside an old glass jar because there were no vases left. His heart broke. That evening Ethan repaired the broken front gate before riding home. He didn't say why. He simply did it. The next morning he returned with lumber. He fixed part of the barn roof. The day after that, he repaired the horse stalls. Then the water pump. Then the windmill. He accepted no payment. As for no thanks, the town noticed. Naturally, the gossip began. At Miller's General Store, voices filled the room. Carter's helping Dawson's widow. After everything? Maybe he's trying to buy the ranch cheap. Nah. I heard he's in love with her. The entire store erupted with laughter. Sheriff Cole Mercer, sitting quietly in the corner, finally spoke. You're all wrong. Every head turned. Cole slowly stood. The only thing Ethan Carter has ever been guilty of is loving people more than himself. Nobody laughed after that. Several days later, Lucy waited near the fence holding a small basket. When Ethan arrived, she smiled brightly. I made biscuits. You did. She nodded proudly. They're a little burnt. Ethan laughed. My favorite kind. She handed him the basket. Mama says thank you. But she's too stubborn to say it herself. Ethan smiled. Sounds familiar. Lucy tilted her head. Were you really Daddy's friend? Ethan looked toward the distant hills. Once. What happened? He searched for the right words. Sometimes grown-ups let pride become louder than love. Lucy thought about that. That's silly. It is. She looked up at him with innocent certainty. Then don't waste any more time. Before Ethan could respond, she ran back toward the house. He stood there smiling. Children always found the simplest truths. That night Ethan sat alone on his porch watching the sunset paint the prairie gold. William's letter rested in his hands once more. This time he folded it carefully and placed it inside his coat pocket over his heart. He looked toward the distant Dawson ranch. The lights inside the house flickered softly against the darkening sky. For years he had convinced himself loneliness was easier than opening his heart again. Now, a widow with tired eyes. A little girl with endless hope. And one dying friend's final wish had quietly begun changing everything. Ethan whispered into the evening breeze. I'll keep my promise, Will. I'll protect them. Even if it costs me the life I finally learned to live. Far across the prairie, Clara stood on her own porch watching the tiny silhouette of Ethan's ranch disappear beneath the setting sun. For reasons she couldn't explain. For the first time since William's death, she didn't feel completely alone. The first rays of morning sunlight stretched across the endless prairie, turning the dew-covered grass into a sea of gold. For the first time in weeks, the Dawson ranch didn't feel abandoned. The sound of hammers echoed from the barn while horses neighed impatiently in their stalls. Ethan Carter stood on the roof, replacing broken wooden boards one by one. Sweat ran down his face despite the cool morning breeze, but he never slowed his pace. Below, Lucy watched with wide eyes. Mama, she called excitedly. Mr. Carter builds faster than anyone. Clara smiled as she hung freshly washed clothes on a line outside the house. I believe you. It had been nearly 3 weeks since William's funeral. 3 weeks since Ethan had quietly stepped into their lives. He had repaired fences, rebuilt the stable doors, fixed the leaking roof, and even helped deliver a healthy foal during a stormy night. Yet he had never once mentioned William's letter. He never expected thanks. He simply showed up every morning and left every evening before supper. The townspeople had begun to notice. Some admired him. Others whispered that a widowed woman and a lonely cowboy spending so much time together could only end one way. Clara heard every rumor. She ignored every one of them. Because she had learned something about Ethan that the town never understood. He never helped to be seen. He helped because he couldn't walk away from someone in need. One afternoon, Clara carried a pitcher of cold lemonade toward the barn. She found Ethan repairing an old wagon wheel. You've been working since sunrise. He looked up and smiled. The wagon won't fix itself. She handed him a glass. You don't have to do all this. I know. Then why do you? Ethan wiped his hands on a cloth before answering. Because your husband asked me. Clara looked at him for a long moment. I don't think that's the only reason anymore. For the first time in years, Ethan looked away before answering. I made him a promise. And promises matter to you. They're all a man really owns. His quiet words lingered between them. Clara couldn't explain why, but every conversation with Ethan left her heart feeling a little lighter. Days slowly turned into weeks. The ranch slowly came back to life. Fresh paint covered the fences. The horses looked healthier. The vegetable garden, once buried beneath weeds, began producing tomatoes, beans, and corn again. Lucy laughed more often than she had in years. One evening she raced toward Ethan carrying a fishing pole. Will you teach me? He chuckled. I don't know. Please? You'll have to wake up before sunrise. I will. And no complaining about mosquitoes. I promise. The next morning before dawn, Lucy was already waiting outside wearing boots far too large for her tiny feet. Ethan couldn't stop laughing. You actually came. You said cowboys never break promises. I did. And I don't either. As they rode toward the river, Clara watched from the porch. For the first time since William became ill, she heard genuine laughter echo across the ranch. Tears quietly filled her eyes. Not from sadness. From relief. The river flowed gently beneath towering cottonwood trees. Lucy sat beside Ethan, patiently holding her fishing line. Mr. Carter? Oh. Can I ask something? You just did. She giggled. Were you ever married? His smile slowly faded. No. Why? He stared across the water for several seconds. Because sometimes life changes before you're ready. Lucy tilted her head. Did you love someone? He nodded. A long time ago. What happened? I waited too long. She frowned. Why? I thought doing the right thing meant giving up what I wanted. Did she stop loving you? No. Then why didn't you marry her? Ethan sighed softly. Because by the time I finally went looking for her, she was already gone. Lucy quietly looked at the river. I'm sorry. So am I. That evening, Clara found Ethan sitting alone beside the old windmill watching the sunset. She carried 2 cups of coffee. I thought you might need this. He accepted it gratefully. Thank you. For several minutes neither of them spoke. The prairie was peaceful. Crickets had begun singing. The setting sun painted the sky with shades of orange and crimson. Finally Clara broke the silence. Lucy told me about the woman. Ethan smiled faintly. She asks difficult questions. She said you loved someone. I did. What was her name? He stared toward the horizon. Emily. Were you engaged? No. I was too busy working. He laughed bitterly. I kept telling myself there would always be another season. Another winter. Another spring. Another chance. There wasn't. Clara listened quietly. She became sick. By the time I reached her family ranch, the funeral had already ended. His voice almost disappeared. I never even got to tell her how much I loved her. Clara slowly reached across the bench and placed her hand over his. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. The touch lasted only a few seconds. But somehow, it felt like the loneliest parts of 2 broken hearts had recognized each other. When Clara finally pulled her hand away, both of them pretended nothing had happened. Yet neither of them forgot it. A week later, Silver Creek held its annual harvest festival. Lucy had begged Clara to attend. The town square overflowed with music, dancing, food, and laughter. Children chased one another between colorful market stalls while local musicians played cheerful fiddle tunes. Ethan almost didn't come. Crowds had never been his favorite. But when Lucy spotted him near the blacksmith shop, she ran straight toward him. You came. I guess I did. You have to dance. I absolutely do not. You promised. I don't remember promising that. You smiled. That doesn't count. It does. Before Ethan could protest again, Lucy grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the center of town where Clara stood laughing for the first time anyone could remember. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, the noisy festival around them seemed to disappear. Clara couldn't help smiling. You've already lost. Ethan looked down at Lucy. I think you're right. The 3 of them spent the afternoon together, sharing roasted corn, homemade pie, and quiet laughter. From a distance, they looked exactly like a family. Not everyone was happy to see it. Standing near the general store was Victor Langford, the the richest ranch owner in the county. Well-dressed, confident, and admired by nearly everyone, Victor watched Clara with growing interest. He turned to one of his ranch hands. "So, that's William Dawson's widow?" "Yes, sir." "And the cowboy?" "Ethan Carter." Victor studied Ethan carefully. "I've heard he's honorable." The ranch hand nodded. "People trust him." Victor smiled. "Honor doesn't pay debts." His eyes returned to Clara. "I think it's time I introduced myself." Unaware that someone else had just set his sights on Clara, Ethan laughed as Lucy tried to beat him in a horseshoe game. For the first time in many years, he wasn't thinking about the past. He was beginning to imagine a future. The harvest festival ended beneath a sky filled with stars, but Victor Langford's interest in Clara Dawson had only just begun. Unlike most ranchers in Silver Creek, Victor wasn't known for kindness. He was known for success. His ranch stretched farther than anyone else's. He owned hundreds of cattle, dozens of hired hands, and enough money to buy nearly every acre surrounding the town. And Victor always got what he wanted. The following morning, a polished black carriage rolled into the Dawson ranch. Lucy was feeding chickens when she saw it. "Mama?" "A fancy wagon." Clara stepped onto the porch just as Victor removed his hat with a confident smile. "Mrs. Dawson. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Clara politely nodded. "What brings you here, Mr. Langford?" "I came with a business proposal." He looked around the ranch. "It's improving." "Thank you. I hear Ethan Carter has been helping." "He has." Victor smiled, though there wasn't much warmth behind it. "He's a good man." "But good men rarely become wealthy." Clara remained silent. Victor continued. "I know about your debt." Her expression changed immediately. "I also know the bank won't wait forever." He opened a leather briefcase and placed several documents on the porch railing. "I can pay every dollar you owe." Clara looked at him carefully. "In return?" Victor's smile widened. "I'd like to court you." Silence settled over the porch. Lucy looked back and forth between them, confused. Victor spoke gently. "You deserve security. Your daughter deserves a future. You deserve a home where you'll never worry about another unpaid bill." He paused. "Think about it." Without waiting for an answer, he climbed back into his carriage and rode away. Clara stood frozen. The offer echoed in her mind long after the dust disappeared. That evening Ethan arrived with fresh lumber for the stable. He immediately noticed Clara's distant expression. "Everything all right?" She forced a smile. "Just tired." Lucy wasn't nearly as careful. "A rich cowboy wants Mama to marry him." Clara sighed. "Lucy." Ethan slowly set the lumber down. "I see." "He said he'll save the ranch." Silence followed. Ethan nodded once. "That's generous." Clara searched his face. "Aren't you going to ask what I said?" "It isn't my place." She wanted him to ask. She wanted him to care. Instead, he simply picked up his hammer and continued working. That hurt far more than she expected. Over the next week Victor visited often. He brought flowers, fresh fruit, new dresses for Clara, books for Lucy. The entire town assumed the wedding was only a matter of time. Even the sheriff quietly asked Ethan one afternoon, "You planning to do something?" Ethan kept repairing a fence. "What should I do?" "Tell her how you feel." He smiled sadly. "I made William a promise." "You promised to protect them. You didn't promise to spend the rest of your life pretending you don't love her." Ethan looked toward the distant Dawson house. "I've already buried one woman because I waited too long. I won't destroy another family because I couldn't let go." Sheriff Cole shook his head. "Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is tell the truth." A few days later Ethan made a decision. Before sunrise he saddled Storm. He left a small wooden box on Clara's porch. Inside were the original property papers William had once entrusted to him before their friendship ended, along with enough money to pay the remaining debt. There was also a handwritten note. "Claire, William asked me to protect you and Lucy. My promise ends the day you're safe again. The ranch is yours. The debt is paid. You deserve a future without whispers, without gossip, and without someone standing in the way of your happiness. Take care of Lucy. And thank you for reminding a lonely cowboy what kindness feels like again. Ethan Carter." By the time Clara found the note, Ethan was already miles away. Lucy ran outside in tears. Mama? He's leaving. Clara looked toward the open prairie. A tiny rider disappeared into the morning fog. Something inside her finally broke. Not from grief. From realization. She wasn't afraid of losing the ranch anymore. She was terrified of losing Ethan. Without another word, she climbed onto William's old horse. Lucy jumped onto the second horse beside her. Come on. We have to catch him. Nearly 5 miles west of town, Ethan stopped beside the old oak tree where William had once taught him to ride. He looked back one last time. The ranches stretched across the valley beneath the rising sun. He whispered quietly, I kept my promise, brother. Just then, he heard hoofbeats. Fast, desperate. He turned. Clara rode toward him as quickly as her horse could manage. Lucy followed close behind. Clara barely waited for her horse to stop before climbing down. She walked straight toward Ethan. Her breathing was uneven. So, this is how you say goodbye. Ethan lowered his eyes. It's better this way. For who? You. No. For you. He looked surprised. I've already lost one husband. I'm not letting another man walk away because he's too afraid to stay. Ethan looked at her, speechless. You think I don't know why you're leaving? I know. You believe you're honoring William. She stepped closer. You're wrong. She reached into her pocket. William's letter. The second page Ethan had never seen. I found this hidden inside after the funeral. With trembling hands, Ethan unfolded it. The final paragraph read, If you ever forgive me, don't spend the rest of your life alone because of my mistakes. If Clara ever finds happiness again, I hope it's with the only man I ever truly trusted. Take care of my girls. And don't waste the years the way I did. Ethan could no longer hold back the tears. Clara gently took the letter from his hands. I don't need saving anymore. I need you. His voice barely escaped. Clara. I love you. I think I've loved you from the day you stood alone beneath that oak tree and refused to let the whole town change the kind of man you are. Ethan smiled through tears. I tried not to love you. I told myself every day that I couldn't. But somewhere between fixing your fences, teaching Lucy to fish, and watching you smile again, I lost that fight. Lucy grinned. I knew it. Both adults laughed through their tears. 3 months later, the first snow of winter dusted the prairie. Beneath the same old oak tree where William had been buried, the people of Silver Creek gathered once more. This time, no one wore black. Clara wore a simple ivory dress. Ethan stood beside her in his best brown suit, his weathered cowboy hat resting beneath his arm. Sheriff Cole performed the ceremony. When Ethan slipped the wedding band onto Clara's finger, he whispered, I'll spend the rest of my life proving this wasn't just a promise. She smiled. I know. Lucy hugged them both before the ceremony had even ended. I finally get my cowboy. Everyone laughed. After the wedding, Clara walked alone to William's grave carrying fresh white lilies. She knelt quietly. Thank you. The wind gently stirred the grass. I'll never forget you. But you were right. She smiled through tears. We found our way home. She placed the flowers beside the headstone and walked back toward Ethan and Lucy, who were waiting beside 2 saddled horses. As the 3 of them rode across the golden prairie together, the setting sun painted long shadows behind them. For years, Ethan Carter believed his life had ended the day he lost his best friend. He was wrong. Sometimes God doesn't erase the past. He simply uses it to lead broken hearts toward the family they were always meant to find. And in the endless Wild West, where loneliness often outlived love, a lonely cowboy, a brave widow, and a little girl finally found the one thing every soul was searching for: home.